They've been very good now with tornado warnings and having as much as 45 minutes in advance to take those actions, but it works much more smoothly if those plans are already in place and if you've practiced them a couple of times. Work through various scenarios so that everyone in the household feels comfortable about the plans that are in play. Make sure that what you've determined will be your best options are viable.
Whether it's lightning, thunderstorms, flash floods, or tornadoes, Kansas certainly sees its share of severe weather during the spring and summer. Unfortunately, that severe weather can result in widespread property damage and, in the worst-case scenario, loss of life. While there's not much that can be done to prevent storm damage, there are steps that we can take to help protect ourselves from severe weather. On today's Sound Living, having a plan for severe weather season. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. Kansas State University climatologist Mary Knapp has been documenting Kansas weather, the good and the bad, for more than 20 years. She joins us today to offer tips for severe weather season. Mary, I know we're past the time we normally talk about severe weather awareness, but as it turns out this year, that hasn't been an issue.
Right. We had our Severe Weather Awareness Week in March, as usual, and the National Weather Service, of course, has had their regular storm spotting schedule. But this year, the severe weather has been a very slow outbreak. We have had a couple of hail events, a few damaging wind events, but we haven't had any tornadoes yet. And this is the latest for a first tornado since at least 2000.
We normally think of May as being one of our more active months for tornadoes.
Right. May is actually the month that we have a peak in the most tornadoes. We have had them as early as January and as late as December, but there is a very distinct peak in May. And believe it or not, you would think as we move into June and July that we would have an active pattern, but the contrast in air masses tends to be less as we move into the summer season. So there's a fairly steep drop-off as we leave May and enter our summer months.
That transition period is kind of the roughest.
Right. As we transition from our cool winter conditions to our warm summer conditions, that sets up the imbalance in energy that fuels the powerful storms. You usually have to have at least some moisture to go into play with that. So the fact that we've had a very dry start to the year has also influenced the lack of tornadic activity.
We put a lot of emphasis on tornadoes, but in fact, we really need to also focus on severe thunderstorms because those can be more deadly.
Well, with a severe thunderstorm, there are several things to be considered in that. One, if you have a severe thunderstorm, it's always possible for it to generate a tornado without much advance warning. So if there's a severe thunderstorm warning, don't forget the fact that there could be a tornado lurking in that storm. The other is that with thunderstorms, you've got the possibility, obviously, of lightning, and you can have a very heavy downpour of rain, which can cause flash flooding. And actually, if we look at historical records, it is more common to have higher fatality numbers due to lightning or flash flooding than there are due to tornado deaths.
And because it has been so dry, is flash flooding a real concern this year?
Well, flash flooding can always be a concern. You don't have to have huge amounts of water to produce a flash flooding event. All you need for it to create that flooding problem is to have it come quickly enough. So if you have a very intense downburst, it may only be a half an inch of water, but if it comes in 5 minutes, you can have problems with it. The characteristic of the flooding will, again, depend upon the characteristics of the storm. When you have dry soils, they can seal up faster and not penetrate. Again, particularly if you have those very intense rain events. If you have rain like we had this last weekend where it was stretched out over most of a 2-day period, you don't have those flooding issues because most of that water is penetrating the soils, and we've got a lot of space in those soils before they'll be completely saturated.
In winter, we talk about having that winter weather safety kit in the vehicle. What should we be doing in terms of maybe some sort of summer safety?
Well, in the summer safety, a couple of things that you're going to want to do is first have a NOAA weather radio and have it available. If you can get a portable one, that can be handy if you're out traveling, if you're out at the ball games or something else. You want to keep an eye on the weather forecasts and be alert for watches and warnings. Again, watches mean that you need to pay a little bit more close attention to how the weather is developing. A warning means that there's something happening right now and you should be taking action rather than waiting to see what comes.
Talk a little bit more about the weather safety aspect, because I think that we hear a lot about going to lower levels. We hear a lot about doing this, doing that. What are some of the first few things that you should do if a warning is issued?
Well, the first thing should occur before you ever hear warning, and that would be to have a safety plan in place. Talk with your members of your household and identify what would be the safest location in your household. And that will vary from house to house, from apartment to apartment. But identify that in advance. Discuss with all the members of your family or your household what actions would be taken under different circumstances. What would you do if the warning came out when it's the end of school day and kids may be coming home from school, parents may still be at work? Work through various scenarios so that everyone in the household feels comfortable about the plans that are in play. The other thing that you should have is an emergency kit, and that would have water, clothing, shoes, and various items that would be necessary to sustain yourself if there were a disaster. And there are lots of places where you can find information about what might be included in those kits. FEMA.gov is one source for that, where you can find, again, what kind of items that you should have available and readily accessible in the event of a disaster.
A lot of times they call those grab-and-go kits, so that might be a way to search for that. Also, when we talk about finding safety within the home, you mentioned try to find the safest location. How do we determine where that might be?
Well, there again are guides that can help you decide that, but generally it's the lowest level with the most walls between you and the exterior. You want to avoid any large expanses of roof. A bathroom or a closet tends to be a very good place because it tends to have greater structural support around it. So again, look at it with an idea of having as many walls between you and the possible debris as possible.
If you happen to live in a mobile home, for instance, what are the recommendations there?
If you live in a mobile home, the recommendations are to leave. You don't even need to have a tornadic event to have winds strong enough to completely demolish a mobile home. Most mobile home parks have a community shelter that you can go to, so check that out. If not, find out what the plan is in that particular community and where the nearest public shelter might be.
And again, this involves planning, because the last thing you want to do is have to jump in the vehicle to go somewhere with the storm approaching.
Right. They've been very good now with tornado warnings and having as much as 45 minutes in advance to take those actions. But it works much more smoothly if those plans are already in place and if you've practiced them a couple of times. Make sure that what you've determined will be your best options are viable. For example, I talk to students on campus and say, all right, if you're working in the lab after hours and there's a severe storm warning, can you still access the place that you've identified as your safety location? The same applies if you're planning on a public shelter. Is that open and can you get into it? If you're talking in your household, you've got a lot more control of it. But if you're talking in an apartment building, it's like, is there a community room or laundry facility that is a better choice for shelter?
I mentioned vehicles, and for people who get caught in a storm on the road, what should they be doing? Well,
the best choice would be looking for those conditions down the road, and that means listening to the local radio rather than your iPad or your streaming audio, and pull off and wait. And there are plenty of say, a gas station or a restaurant area and sit the storm out and give it a chance to move through. Most of these move through an area very rapidly. You might be delayed a while, but it's a whole lot quicker than driving into the midst of the storm, having an accident, and being delayed much longer, if not injured or killed.
And are we still supposed to get down into the ditch? Do we avoid getting under the overpass? There's been some conversation about that because it worked in one instance, but still not recommended.
Right. What you want to do is go down lower, and the reason for that is one of the biggest causes of death and injury are the flying debris. And if you move up, as saw in the infamous underpass video, you're moving up into that debris path, and you're more likely to be injured. So going the lowest possible to the ground, again, you have to assess the situation as it develops. You don't want to jump out into a flooded ditch, but you could still get down low on the ground without getting into those floodwaters. So again, think about it and look at what the safest option is for you in that particular situation, and it will vary from storm to storm.
You mentioned the flying debris, and one of the things we often hear is to use a mattress for extra protection if you're at home. I've also heard now that a bike helmet is a good idea.
They have talked about having a bike helmet as a way of protecting you from flying debris. Question again is how much protection that will provide. And again, if it's not readily accessible, you don't want to go hunting it up, looking for it in the time of the storm. But yes, that has been one of the recommendations for protecting your head from injuries.
And that's one of the reasons why you said make sure that there are shoes in that grab-and-go bag, because that's another issue, is a lot of times these might happen during the night when you have to get up, you don't have your shoes, and there's a lot of things you can step on.
Right. And again, what you're going to be facing is a lot of broken glass, a lot of splinters and other things, which make it very easy to be injured by that debris. So if you are getting up, again, it's very easy to have a pair of aqua socks or something of that nature that are enclosing your entire foot. You don't want to go with flip-flops or sandals. Those aren't giving you enough protection. So you want something that has enough weight to it that it can protect you from that broken glass and other debris that might be around.
The goal here is to keep everyone safe. And I've been through a few tornadoes in the Manhattan area, and they don't seem to last long, but it's very terrifying during that time.
Right, and sometimes the problem is that you may have to wait a while. Again, we're talking 45 minutes alert time. One thing that you might do, particularly if you have small children in the household, is to have some sort of game or diversion available to them. Coloring book, a deck of cards, something like that can allow them to calm themselves as they wait for that storm to pass. Another trick that can be very useful is, again, it doesn't do much good to have a plan if you don't practice it. So if you have emergency food in your to-go kit, you might have a monthly or every other month practice of that and eat some of the stuff that's in your go kit and replace it with fresh. That way, when you actually need it, it's available, and you've got a fun way of practicing your actual event. And again, when you're preparing that emergency kit, you don't necessarily need to worry about strict diet plans that you might normally have. What you're going to want is something that you enjoy eating that can give you some comfort in the midst of what would be another trying time. Don't forget to include plenty of water. Also, if you have any special medications that are necessary, you want to make sure that you have a supply of those in that emergency kit so it's available. It may be that what you do is have that medicine in a certain place and you have a bag that you can take down to your shelter. But again, don't forget those medications and have them available.
That's Kansas State University climatologist Mary Knapp. For more information on getting prepared for severe weather season, visit weather.gov. Weather.gov. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.